Formula 1 is often seen as the pinnacle of open-wheel motorsport. Even if a driver comes from the likes of IndyCar in the United States or Super Formula in Japan, most would jump at a chance in F1, with a few exceptions such as legends like Scott Dixon, who felt it was better to be a big fish in a small pond and continued racking up championships in America after his test with Williams and Toyota in 2004, rather than risk being chewed up and spat out by the often cruel nature of the revolving door of drivers who couldn't adapt to their surroundings for one reason or another. Even despite the ever-linear path from modern junior formulas to the big leagues, 15 nationalities have won a Formula 1 World Championship from every continent except Asia, meaning all of the champions tend to come from distinctly unique backgrounds. Whether it's Juan Manuel Fangio, who initially began his career as a riding mechanic, or Graham Hill, who didn't even get a regular driving licence, by which the age Sebastian Vettel was already crowned twice at 24, and even as racing has needed more dedication from earlier on in your life as the years have progressed, you still get some interesting stories. Jacques Villeneuve, whose opinions I covered in a video last week, made the switch from IndyCar successfully, and both Jenson Button and Nico Rosberg spent up to 10 years before winning their only titles each, but nonetheless, they deserved them. As contrived and controversial as some crowns can be, 99% of the time you can say that the guy who eventually won it at the end of the season deserved to do so. The likes of Max Verstappen in 2021 or Alain Prost in 1989 won a sizable amount of the races on offer, whilst being criticised for their on-track conduct, but they're still both amongst the greatest of all time. Whilst there are no completely mediocre or bad drivers who fluked their way into a title in a good car, there have been ones who failed to achieve much outside of their titles in the rest of their career. Phil Hill is the champion with the least amount of career points on 98, nearly half of Sterling Moss, who is considered by most to be the best driver never to be crowned at the end of a season. But it's not Phil Hill that this video is going to focus on, it's his namesake, who won his title 35 years after the American triumphed. Damon, that is, that I'm going to focus on today. Let me tell you the story of the F1 champion who only had 2 good races. Ever.
Manuel Fangio is in the lead on the last lap of the German Grand Prix.
Jim Clark drives the Formula 1 Lotus Sport to victory on the racetracks of the world.
And look at that! Colossally, that's Mansell! That is Nigel Mansell! Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately! This is amazing! Senna goes off at the first corner.
And I've got to stop, because I've got a lump in my throat.
Despite being the son of a 2-time world champion and the only winner of the Triple Crown of motorsport, Damon Hill's path to the top was nowhere near as easy as the likes of Mick Schumacher and Bruno Senna. This was because, when Graham died in a plane crash in 1975, by which time his son was just 15, he had failed to complete a lot of the paperwork surrounding the aircraft he was flying, meaning he was essentially doing the aviation equivalent of driving with no MOT or insurance. The family fortune was eaten away by their legal expenses that arose from the accident, which meant that if Damon wanted to start a driving career, he'd have to work his way up from the bottom of the ladder with none of the lovely nepotism other relatives of great names had access to. He started racing motorcycles in 1981 until his mum asked him to switch over to cars 3 years later over safety concerns, and then came third in the 1985 Formula Ford Festival. He remained competitive in British F3 through 1986 and 87, before coming third in this series too in 1988, beating future boat enthusiast JJ Leto and future nonce Gary Brabham, as well as finishing second in the Macau Grand Prix behind Enrico Battaglia. Hill struggled to keep his career going in 1989, only doing part-time campaigns in International F3000, the final step before Formula 1, and British F3 again, while doing one race in the British Touring Car Championship, and also running the Le Mans 24-hour race for Richard Lloyd Racing in a Porsche 962. As the new decade came around though, he landed a full-time F3000 drive with Middlebridge Racing, and finished 13th in the championship, only scoring points once with a second place at Brands Hatch. While running a second full-time campaign in 1991, he landed a test drive with the Williams F1 team. Back in the days before dedicated academies for racing talent to come through the route and come into F1 teams at increasingly young ages, it was often believed that those who became test drivers were washed up because they couldn't land a full-time seat with any proper team. So when Damon signed for the Grove outfit, taking over duties from Mark Blundell, having not even raced in the top category despite being a relatively old 31 years old by F1 standards, it was believed that he would follow the trend of test drivers not achieving much in their careers. He completed his schedule in F3000 for 1991, finishing 7th in the standings with one podium that he achieved in Nogaro. Then in 1992 was made the reserve driver for Williams, which could have easily materialised into something more quite quickly, as the team number 1, Nigel Mansell, broke his foot at the season finale of 1991 in Adelaide, yet the plucky Brit decided to race the entire of the championship campaign in 92 despite incredible pain and uncomfortableness. Damon wouldn't have to wait for a seat to open up at Williams though, as after Giovanna Amati embarrassed herself in the 3 races she did for Brabham and then didn't pay them the sponsorship money she owed, it opened up a seat for Hill to swoop in and make his debut at the Spanish Grand Prix. The Brabham outfit had very much fallen from their peak of around a decade earlier, going from drivers' championships to struggling to qualify for every race a mere 6 years later, a trend that hadn't been bucked by the time 1992 rolled around. The new British recruit will be partnered by ex-Scuderia Modena driver Eric van der Poel, who was entering his sophomore F1 season. Hill was outqualified by the Belgian by 9/10 of a second in Catalonia in 30th and last place, 2 positions behind his counterpart, as both failed to reach the top 26 to actually get into the race. His form improved in Imola though, as he put 4/10 on van der Poel as the pair were the 2 slowest cars that didn't get into the main event, then had the same margin that he put on his teammate in Imola put on him at the Monaco Grand Prix. Van der Poel was only 36 thousandths away from the magic top 26, but then in Montreal and Magny-Cours, Damon was 1.3 seconds away from his inter-team adversary and last, but then made that up in his home race at Silverstone by putting a massive more than 2 seconds on him, and more importantly, sneaking onto the grid in 26th and last place, making the team's first start since the season opener in Kyalami. He finished 16th and last on Sunday, 4 laps down, but the car was undoubtedly the worst of those who made it to the checkered flag. At Hockenheim, van der Poel put 3/4 of a second on Hill as the Brit was last in 30th again, but for the Hungarian event, Eric saw the writing on the wall for the Brabham outfit and jumped ship to fellow backmarker Fond Metal, leaving Damon as the team's only remaining driver. He qualified a season-high 25th at a track he'd later grow a great affiliation to in his career, and survived an attritional Sunday to get another season-high in 11th place. But after that result, the Brabham team folded after 30 years in F1, having experienced a range of difficulties since ex-owner Bernie Eccleston directed his focus to running Formula 1 as a whole, leaving the team operation in 1987, which instigated a merry-go-round of new benefactors who had ulterior motives and didn't want to resurrect the fortunes of a multiple championship-winning team. Also, just referencing that Hungary bit, I have done a video on Damon Hill's love affair with the Hungaroring if you'd like to check it out in the top right corner of your screen. Hill was out of the drive for the rest of the season, and when Riccardo Patrese left Williams to join Benetton, thinking he would be forced out so the team could create a combination of 2 of either Alain Prost, who was returning from his sabbatical, Ayrton Senna, or the incumbent champion Nigel Mansell, only one of these 3 actually ended up with a seat at the reigning champions. Senna couldn't be there if Prost was, due to a contract clause put up by Alain vetoing the Brazilian, and Nigel refused to accept being the number 2 driver, like Alain also insisted. I'll say one thing, Alain Prost was a bloody fantastic driver, but man was he probably the most politically inclined of them all. With Senna, Mansell and Patrese all missing out on the second seat, Damon was pretty much the only option the team had left, and so he lined up alongside the returning 3-time champion, going from one of, if not the worst teams on the grid, to undoubtedly the best one. At the first round of 1993 in Kyalami, while Prost got pole position, Hill was 1.9 seconds behind in 4th, but the Brit crashed with Alex Zanardi on lap 16 before he could have a chance to recover. He finished the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2nd behind Senna, then in Donington finished runner-up to the dominant Ayrton in the wet, while Alain stalled in his pit box during one of the countless rounds of pit stops the pair made. Hill's brakes went on lap 20 in Imola, then in Catalonia his engine expired 2/3 of the way through the race. During the Monaco Grand Prix, Prost jumped the start and was given a 10-second stop-go, but was stuck in the pits for 90 seconds as he stalled twice trying to exit, yet he drove his socks off to only finish around half a minute off of Damon, while setting a fastest lap a full second quicker than the Englishman. In Canada, the first race both drivers finished without any caveats, Alain won 52 seconds ahead of his team counterpart who was 3rd, then Hill outqualified him for the first time all year in Magny-Cours and finished less than a second behind on race day. Damon suffered engine failure in Silverstone on the same lap as it was in Spain, that being number 41 while he was leading following a safety car restart. Then in Hockenheim, Prost got a bad start dropping to 4th before passing Senna on the run-up to the first chicane on the old layout. Then at the second chicane, Martin Brundle behind him spun in the braking zone and nearly collected the French driver, yet he swerved and avoided him by bypassing the corner. Both drivers got a 10-second stop-go for cutting the course, and Alain served his penalty after he'd overtaken Hill on lap 10. Despite the infraction costing him in excess of 20 seconds, he was on a charge to re-overtake his teammate who had led since the 10th tour and had closed to within 8 seconds of him by the penultimate lap. However, Hill's tyre punctured on approach to the third chicane with less than 2 to go and retired from the race, handing the win to Prost. Everything fell together for the British driver in Hungary though, as although Prost stalled on the formation lap, meaning he started last, then finished 7 laps down due to having to sit in the pits to repair a problem with the rear wing, Damon dominated affairs at his favourite track, lapping everyone up to 4th and finishing 71 seconds clear of second place Riccardo Patrese. A slow stop for Alain on Sunday in Spa after demolishing Hill in qualifying by 9/10 left the Brit to claim another win. Then in Monza struck lucky again as Prost's engine expired with just 5 laps left while leading, handing another top result to his teammates. Hill started at the back in Estoril as his own car refused to start up on the formation lap, and he recovered to an impressive 3rd, but in Suzuka, the French Williams driver was more than a minute clear of his adversary as he adapted better to the changeable conditions. At the final round in Adelaide, Damon was challenging Alain for second place when he got on the power too early coming out of the Decaturville hairpin and spun, meaning he finished 20 seconds behind. On reflection, Hill's 1993 season was a mixed bag. He got 2 more retirements than Prost, none of which were his fault, apart from maybe turning in on Zanardi in Kyalami. Both Williams drivers lost 2 certain wins due to bad luck or reliability, and despite Alain fumbling the bag in Brazil and Monaco, he still outscored Damon by a margin of 3 race victories. It was still a good year for Hill though, as he had shown glimpses of potential, beating his teammate on merit at points, but also lacked consistency, such as in that Suzuka race where he was beaten by over a minute. Despite Prost being not at all fond of the electronically aided cars, he put half a second on Damon in qualifying on average, and beat him by half a minute on average in the races both of them finished without issue. Going into 1994 though, Prost retired from F1 and Hill received a new teammate, another legendary driver, the 3-time champion Ayrton Senna. The Williams package had lost its utter dominance due to the banning of driver aids such as traction control and ABS, and was now only marginally faster than the second fastest car produced by Benetton, at least for the first portion of the season. Senna showed his extreme qualifying prowess on home turf in the season opener at Interlagos by putting his car on pole position, 1.6 seconds clear of Hill in 4th, but he spun out chasing Schumacher for the win during the latter stages, leaving his teammate to pick up the scraps and finish runner-up behind the German himself. Ayrton put 6/10 on Damon in Aida on Saturday, then crashed out at turn 1 after being hit by Mika Hakkinen, while Damon spun off trying to overtake the Finn on lap 3 before climbing back up to 2nd. His transmissions failed on lap 46, allowing Schumacher to cruise to another easy victory, and with their double retirement in Japan, the Williams team were only 4th in the constructors' standings at this point in the year, behind Ferrari and the vastly inferior Jordan, but Senna worked his magic in Imola qualifying again, putting 6/10 on Hill, getting pole while the Brit was 4th. We all know what happened during the race. Ayrton crashed on lap 7 coming through Tamburello and was killed by an errant piece of suspension entering the cockpit, which prompted many safety protocols being introduced into F1 in the coming years. Meanwhile, on the restart following Senna's death, Hill damaged his nose cone trying to overtake Schumacher and had to pit to replace it, only recovering to 6th. The weekend in Monaco was a tough one for Williams, as they only fielded 1 car for Damon, but he qualified 4th, 1.5 seconds off of Schumacher, and crashed with Hakkinen on lap 1, meaning it was another bad result. After 4 races, Michael led the standings on 40 points, meanwhile Hill was 3rd on just 7, and the team had fallen to 5th in the Constructors. Hill was handed his first win of the season on a plate in Spain, as Schumacher finished 2nd after being stuck in 5th gear for a large portion of the race. The gap was now 29 points to Michael. The Benetton driver cantered to another victory in Canada, while Hill was 2nd, 49 seconds clear of his new teammate, a rookie David Coulthard. Then Nigel Mansell entered the driving seat alongside Damon in Magny-Cours, and would compete in every remaining round that didn't clash with his kart commitments over in the States. A 41-year-old Mansell, who had been out of F1 for a year and a half, qualified less than a 10th behind Hill in 1st, with Michael just behind the pair. Then during the race, the Enstone team competitor got the best start, and held the lead throughout the entire race apart from during the pit stop phases. Schumacher was now 37 points and nearly 4 race wins clear of Hill in the standings. Then at Silverstone, the complexion of the championship completely changed. Michael overtook Damon on the formation lap on Sunday twice, after qualifying just 0.003 seconds behind, and was given a 5-second stop-and-go penalty for this infringement on lap 14. He had failed to serve as punishment in due course though, and was black flagged on lap 21. However, the Benetton team said there had been a misunderstanding and pulled Schumacher in on the 27th tour to sort out the issue by serving the penalty. Michael initially finished 2nd and was given a severe reprimand for initially ignoring the black flag, while his team was given a $25,000 fine. 5 days before the next race at Hockenheim though, the World Motorsport Council increased the financial damage to $500,000 and issued Schumacher with a 2-race ban. Benetton instantly issued an appeal though, so Michael would be able to compete while investigations were ongoing. Personally, I believe that the initial decision was too weak, but the proposed ban was far too harsh a penalty. I think it would have been fair to give a fine somewhere in the middle, maybe around $250,000, and disqualify Schumacher from Silverstone for ignoring a black flag, whether intentionally or not. And the way I see it, the attempt to stop Schumacher from racing was a ploy to make the title fight, which didn't exist beforehand, actually feasible as a possibility. Nonetheless, this brought Hill back into play, although in Germany he couldn't capitalise on an engine failure for the home hero because he himself tangled with Ukyo Katayama's Tyrrell, forcing a long pit stop and getting suspension damage. Schumacher led Damon home in both the Hungarian qualifying and race sessions, which put the gap between the pair up to 31 points. Then the same thing was projected to happen in Spa as they were 2-3 behind a surprise Jordan of Rubens Barrichello on Saturday, then in the race finished line astern again in first and second. After the race though, Schumacher was disqualified from the win because his wooden skid block, a simple device brought in to stop teams from running their cars excessively low to the ground and potentially bottom out, was worn down too much. Benetton argued that this was because of a spin he'd had at the Fagnes chicane, but the FIA weren't having it and the disqualification stood, closing the gap to 21 points. To make things worse, Schumacher's 2-race ban from earlier was upheld on appeal after the Belgian race, which meant he'd miss both the Italian and Portuguese Grand Prix, both of which Hill won even though his teammate David Coulthard followed him home the entire way both times. On Michael's return with 3 races to go in Jerez, the gap had narrowed from 37 points before the British race to just 1. He came back in style by winning from pole position with the fastest lap, then the Japanese Grand Prix hosted the penultimate round in Suzuka. It was held in the pouring rain, and following a red flag on lap 13 while Schumacher had pulled out a 7-second lead, on the restart, Hill drove like a man possessed to not only overtake the Rainmeister in such conditions, but also put a 10-second gap on him, which was enough to win the last ever red flagged Formula 1 race to be held on aggregate in 2 separate parts. He realistically needed to win that race because if he'd finished second behind Schumacher again, the gap would have been 9 points going into the final race in Adelaide. Instead of 9 though, they were now 1 point apart, with Schumacher ahead, but it was the other Williams of Mansell on pole down under, a full 6.5 tenths clear of Damon in third. The championship protagonist launched into the leading 2 positions at the start though, with gaps ebbing and flowing until lap 36. Michael went wide at the East Terrace corner, hitting the outside wall. Then at the following corner, Hill saw an opportunity to send a move up the German's inside while he recovered. Schumacher turned into him, sending his Benetton onto 2 wheels, into the barriers and out of the race. Meanwhile, Damon made it back to the pits, but was forced to retire with suspension damage. Many since have accused Schumacher of deliberately turning into Hill, but I don't fully agree with this conclusion. Firstly, Michael had just gone off track and most likely wasn't thinking about Damon sending such an audacious dive bomb, but I also think it's on Hill himself for going for a gap like that, not learning from his spin against Prost at a different corner of the same circuit the year prior. It's very likely Michael would have had at least some damage, and had he been significantly hampered in terms of pace, the Williams would have breezed past on any one of the straights. Michael had a penchant for unsportsmanlike conduct, I understand that, but considering the toxicity and heavy bias of the British media, I do think they perpetuated a lie that Schumacher intentionally hit Damon as a coping mechanism. If Damon was a worthy champion, he should have won it at a canter. Even at the start of the season, the Williams was undoubtedly the fastest car, and once upgrades came in through the first half, it lost its difficulty to drive, putting it a level above the Benetton. If that wasn't enough, Michael lost 16 points directly due to disqualifications, both of which were arguably unfair, and got a 2-race ban which lost him another 20 points, which was frankly utter rubbish. Damon got unlucky too, getting involved in 3 on-track squabbles before Adelaide that also lost him points, but he had the title handed to him on a plate by the FIA, and he still squandered it. To lose a championship in the outright best car is bad enough, but when your rival has their results from 4 races literally deleted, you have no excuse. As well as looking at his fight with Schumacher though, we've got to look at how he stacked up against his teammates too. Obviously, Senna never finished a race with the team, but he pulled a full second on Hill on average in qualifying, and I know that you can argue that comparing any driver against Senna on Saturdays is unfair, but I expect him to at least be in the ballpark and not behind other, much slower cars. He trounced a rookie Coulthard overall, although in Monza and Estoril, I think David had started to equal Damon in race trim, but I think the biggest example in his underperformance was against Mansell. Nigel was 41 years old and came back at the French Grand Prix only 77 thousandths off him in qualifying, and although he lost out in race pace, especially in Suzuka where even I'll admit Damon did a fantastic drive, you shouldn't be letting someone like Nigel qualify 7 tenths ahead of you when you're fighting for a world championship. People always talk about how if Senna did the full season in 1994, he'd have won the title, but I'd go as far to say that if Mansell started the year in the car, he'd have been able to do so as well. Going into 1995, Hill was clearly searching for revenge on Schumacher, but I don't think it was in the sense of crashing, like how his season eventually ended up. Coulthard was selected to partner him, and Williams had an even more competitive car than 94, but the reigning runners-up retired in the first round of the season with gearbox failure while leading. It was David who qualified on pole in Buenos Aires by 8 tenths, although Damon had the win handed to him when throttle problems for the Scot forced him out. Then in Imola, pit stop problems meant David finished 50 seconds behind his teammate again. In Spain, Hill dropped to 4th on the last lap with hydraulics issues while Coulthard had gearbox failure. Then the English driver finished 2nd in Monaco behind Schumacher, while David was involved with a crash with John Alesi and Gerhard Berger on the opening lap. Hill had gearbox failure in Canada and his teammates spun off on lap 2, which allowed Benetton's star driver Schumacher to pull a gap on the lead Williams driver despite his own problems relegating him to 5th. Hill finished 2nd behind the German in Magny-Cours. Then in Silverstone, more controversy came about between the pair for the 2nd year running, as the Brit ran into the back of Michael while trying to overtake him, sending both into retirement, and Coulthard lost a certain win due to faulty electronics messing up his pit lane speed limiter and getting him a 10-second stop-go penalty. Hill had a driveshaft failure in Hockenheim, and Shuey's 2-stop strategy beat David to the win by 5 seconds, increasing the gap between Damon and Michael to 21 points in the Benetton driver's favour. Damon won at his eternal best track in Hungary, while Schumacher's fuel pump failed to bring him within 11 points. Then in Spa, the Rainmeister won from 16th on the grid, with Hill 2nd. The pair collided again in Monza, and Hill was given a 1-race suspended ban for causing the crash that sent them both out. Then in Estoril, Coulthard surprisingly scored the championship protagonists by winning with Michael 2nd and Damon 3rd. With 4 rounds remaining, Schumacher led by 17 points over his English adversary, and when Hill spun off at the Nürburgring while Michael won, the championship was pretty much sealed in his favour. Then it was confirmed in Aida, as Damon got 3rd with Michael victorious again. The British driver spun off in Suzuka, then won the season finale in Adelaide by 2 laps, as none of the other top team's drivers finished the race. Schumacher beat Hill by 33 points, despite both only having 3 retirements that weren't their fault, and the Williams was the infinitely better car, so the fact that Hill lost the title due to an array of spins and crashes with Michael meant this really was an awful season for him. Coulthard just about beat Damon on average in qualifying, and in the races was only marginally behind, so when David left the Grove outfit to join McLaren for the money, the Englishman probably breathed a sigh of relief because he was slowly losing grip on the #1 driver status in the team. Reigning IndyCar and Indy 500 champion Jacques Villeneuve joined Hill at Williams in 1996 and went on an intense 6-week testing schedule to get acclimatised to F1. On his debut at the Australian Grand Prix, he qualified on pole and led until an oil leak forced him to drop back and finish 2nd to Damon. Hill won in Brazil while Villeneuve spun off, then in Argentina pulled 12 seconds on his teammate by the checkered flag and took his 3rd victory on the bounce. Jacques got the upper hand at the Nürburgring by winning in just his 4th race start, finishing half a minute ahead of Damon who was 4th. Then at Imola, Hill won while Villeneuve retired with suspension failure after recovering from a puncture on the first lap. Both drivers retired in the chaotic Monaco Grand Prix, then Damon did so again in Spain after spinning off 3 times in the downpour conditions in just 12 laps, while Jacques was 3rd. Villeneuve followed his teammate home in a 1-2 finish at his home race in Canada, and again in Magny-Cours, and won in Silverstone when Damon was sluggish off the start and retired due to wheel nut problems. It was Hill on top again in Hockenheim with the Canadian 3rd, however in Hungary it was the rookie who won on the Englishman's favourite circuit. At Spa, pit stop miscommunications between a runners-up Villeneuve and the Williams crew meant his adversary was unable to run the optimal strategy and finished 5th. Controversies arose in Monza as both Grove drivers failed to score points due to contact with tyre stacks being placed at the Rettifilo chicanes. Then in Estoril, Jacques led Damon home for his 4th victory of the season, closing the gap in the championship to just 9 points heading into the final race in Suzuka. Villeneuve took pole but had a slow start and eventually retired with wheel trouble, and it handed Hill his first world title on a plate. It took for him to not just have a completely dominant car, but also a rookie teammate who had 2 more problems in races than he did, one of which could have seen him lose to a guy competing in his first F1 race. Out of 4 seasons and the undisputed fastest machine on the grid, he'd won just 1 championship, and while I can excuse losing to Alain Prost in 1993, he should have had 1994 and 95 so far wrapped up that you wouldn't have smelt the body even if you were only 2 metres away from it. Villeneuve lost a potential 14 points more than Damon due to things outside of his control in 1996, which would have put him just 5 behind in the end of season tally. A guy with the experience of Hill should not have been that close to a rookie. End of. The strange thing about his championship, though, was that he knew he wouldn't be at Williams for 1997, regardless of his results. After the merry-go-round of 1993, where the team went from having 5 driver candidates to barely having 2 because they backstabbed the guy who won a title with a broken foot, you'd think they'd have figured out how not to annoy their number 1 drivers. Well, as it turned out, they'd learned nothing, as Hill was told by Frank Williams and Patrick Head that after his bad 1995 season, he'd be dropped at the end of 96, regardless of how he performed. So for the second time in 4 years, Williams were binning off their reigning champion for an unproven quantity. In 1993 it was Hill himself, but here it was Heinz-Harald Frentzen. If you also include Nelson Piquet and Prost leaving after their triumphs, that's 4 champions in 9 seasons. Not only did Frank annoy Damon though, he also ticked off his chief designer Adrian Newey, who hadn't been consulted about dropping Hill despite it stipulating in his contract that he would be part of a choice about which drivers drove for the team, so he went on to gardening leave to join McLaren, while Villeneuve won his own title in the design Newey created. Given Damon's overall mediocrity and Villeneuve's sheer drop-off in performance as soon as he wasn't in a Newey-designed Williams, there's a case to be made that both were just average drivers whose lack of championship credentials were hidden by the lack of knowledge of just how dominant those cars were. There's a good chance that in an alternate timeline with a Schumacher or Hakkinen-level driver in control, that we could look back on the 1996 and 97 Williams cars just as fondly as we do with Mansell and Prost's FW14 and FW15Bs. While his ex-teammate romped to his own solitary crown, Hill moved over to TWR Arrows, a project ran by Tom Wilkinshaw Racing, who were looking to become a new force in Grand Prix racing, which meant that signing Hill was obviously a counterintuitive move. They signed Pedro Diniz as Damon's teammate, an ex-40 and Ligier driver who was literally only bought in to bankroll the outfit and pay Hill's massive salary. The reigning champion finished just one of the first 6 races in 1997, and even that one in Brazil was classified in 17th after a late engine failure. 2 of these were early collisions, but the others were reliability rated. He only retired from 2 more races in the rest of the season, and scored points only 2 times. A 6th in Silverstone was one of them, but in Hungary, Damon put on the performance of his life. He put his car 3rd on the grid, just 4 attempts off a pole position in 3rd place, and assumed 2nd behind Michael Schumacher until he overtook him on lap 12. Then, the English driver built up a colossal 35-second lead over the 2nd place driver Jacques Villeneuve until his hydraulic pump failed on lap 74, leaving him stuck in 3rd gear and having only an intermittent throttle. He was passed for the lead on the final lap and finished 9 seconds behind. So, the same driver who twice couldn't beat Michael Schumacher in an infinitely faster car can lead by over 35 seconds in a terribly unreliable shitbox that's the 7th or 8th fastest car on the grid. It would be like Valtteri Bottas winning in a stake in 2024. Overall, Damon's 1997 season was a write-off, but he moved to Jordan for 1998, reuniting with his former Junior Series boss Eddie Jordan in F1. It wasn't until the 11th round in Hockenheim where he scored his first points of the year in 4th, then he got the same position in Hungary. At the Belgian Grand Prix, he started 3rd and avoided the first lap chaos that forced 7 cars into retirement and involved 13 competitors in total, then at the restart got a great launch and assumed the lead. His old rival Michael Schumacher went past on lap 8, but on lap 26 he failed to negotiate for slowing David Coulthard, who he was attempting to lap. The pair collided and both retired from the race with terminal damage, leaving Hill back in the lead again with his teammate Ralf Schumacher right behind. Ralph was obviously the faster driver, gaining up to 7 seconds per lap, but it was on average about 2 or 3 quicker every time they went around, until 1 lap after Damon assumed P1, the safety car came out for a collision involving Giancarlo Fisichella and Shinji Nakano. The Brit who was leading was told about his teammate's pace over the radio, and his engineer suggested he let Ralph through, but Damon rejected this idea and suggested he wouldn't give up the position without a fight. He said that if they fought for first and ended up crashing, the team could lose out on not just their first win, but their maiden one too. Some believe it was a cryptic message that if Ralph attempted to overtake Damon, then he would crash him out, but I don't think that was the case. I genuinely believe he was saying that so Eddie Jordan could weigh up the potential risk for one of them making a mistake and taking them both out. It was certainly convenient that a side effect of not battling would guarantee a Hill win, but I don't think there was any malice behind it, just competitive spirits. Damon won with Ralph second, although the German and his brother were furious about the team orders dished out, and Michael bought out Ralph's contract with the Irish outfit because they were unhappy with him not being allowed to fight for wins. The rest of 1998 was fairly quiet, but for 1999, Hill would ironically be partnered at the Buzzin' Hornets by the guy who replaced him at Williams just 2 years earlier, Heinz-Harald Frentzen. The German won 2 races and made a surprise half challenge for the title when Mika Hakkinen and Eddie Irvine seemed to be doing everything in their power not to win the championship. But on the other side of a Jordan garage, Damon scored points only 4 times. Now, as much as I've bashed Hill's reputation with a cricket bat in this video, I will defend his 54-7 point strumming that he received from Frentzen in 1999. He retired from 9 races compared to Frentzen's 3, with 5 of those being collisions, 3 being mechanically induced, and the one at the final round of the year in Suzuka was because he'd mentally checked out and parked a healthy car in the pits instead of finishing his final outing. It was clear that he wanted to have a British Grand Prix be his final race, but Eddie Jordan wouldn't let him retire, so he just couldn't be arsed after that, and it reflected in his results. Looking back on his career, Damon was a very peculiar driver. He started out struggling to even qualify for races, and went from arguably the worst car in 1992 to undoubtedly the best in 1993. And although he lost to Prost, I think that it was inevitable given his experience, even if Alain didn't like the way the Williams handled. 1994 and 1995 were embarrassing though. What should have been 2 dead-on titles were either failures or abject failures. And though I'll give him some leeway in the performances immediately after Senna's death, because of grieving, the hideous gaps before that, and the horrendous ones after, were embarrassing, often losing to Schumacher in a straight fight, and fumbling despite the German being pegged back 36 points and being in an inferior car. The high point of Suzuka is undoubtedly in the top 3 races of Damon's entire career, and it proved he did have an incredibly high performance ceiling, but he couldn't activate it very often at all. In 1995, the thing he couldn't activate was his eyes though, constantly spinning out or crashing into Schumacher, losing out by 33 points, in what was the best car by a considerable margin. 1996 was a given, as the machine he drove was twice as dominant as the year before, and he had a rookie teammate, but it certainly didn't seem that easy. Villeneuve was very close, and on average in races they both had no problems in. It was a Canadian who was actually faster. Then Hill beat the pay driver Pedro Diniz, well done, and also had one of the top 10 race performances in F1 history in my opinion in Hungary, again proving he had a fantastically high performance ceiling but was almost never consistently at that level. 1998 was literally only the fluke Belgian win that was by default, then 1999 was a write-off. He also had a very short career for a champion, only doing 7.5 seasons, which was probably more due to the fact that he only started in F1 at the age of 31 and only started car racing at the age of 23. The similarities with his dad's career are quite ironic too, starting very late, having to rally his team around him after the death of a generation-defining driver, then spending the years after his title win mostly falling back into mediocrity. Graham's career was nearly 2.5 times as long as Damon's, but despite Damon making his debut just a year older than his dad, it was much more common for drivers to go into their mid-40s in the 70s than it was in the 90s. Damon wasn't a bad driver by any stretch, and he wasn't completely unworthy of his championship, but he wouldn't have been anywhere near a title if he was in a car on par with the likes of Schumacher and not 1 miles better. Anyways, with that being said, I think that brings today's video to a close. I hope you enjoyed me detailing Damon Hill's career, and if you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see exclusive content, get videos a day early, and have an opportunity to converse with me personally for as little as $1 or £1 per month. Big shout out to my already existing Patreon subscribers Andy Lamberts, Eamon Al-Dowdy and George Stratford, and you can also follow my X/Twitter account where I post boiling hot lava takes on F1, IndyCar and NASCAR, and follow my Instagram for behind the scenes updates. With my shameless plugging out the way though, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!